Anyone up there on the lights by any chance? You think Kirsten is coming? Awesome. If somebody in earshot can text Kirsten, that would be awesome. Oh, she's figuring it out right now. All right, I'm going to talk even here. Thank you for the flashlight. Is that Ray? Thank you, Ray. All right, I'm going to come a little bit closer then, where it's a little bit brighter while they're working on this. Hello, friends. Welcome to Olney Theatre Center. I'm Jason Loewith. I'm the Artistic Director here. And you are here at Behind the Scenes, which is the program that we have done before opening night performances for probably 8 or 9 years. Usually these programs are all about putting in context the play that we are presenting and opening to the press tonight. That is not actually the case this time. We are going to be spending a lot more time talking about other things because I actually have written it all down. Because tonight is the reveal of the Bernard Family Theater. Kathy Bernard, her amazing contribution here has allowed us to turn the historic into the space that you are going to soon see after the show. Tonight marks the completion of phase 2 of Staging the Future, which has already brought us the renovated Molitz-Gutelsky Theater Lab, the creation of Omi's Pavilion at the Root Family Stage Outdoors, the 1912 oh, thank you. I'll move in a moment, but I'm very comfy. The 1912 Olney Sandy Spring Road House for artist housing, and now the Bernard Family Theater with the as yet unnamed Artistic Suite building. So phase 2B kicks off Tuesday as we turn the Bernard into our scene shop while we finish the final phase, which is the Jim and Carol Trawick Education Center, the Ghana Dunlop Maker Center. Excuse me, Ghana, if you're here, I apologize. I know how to pronounce your name. And a new courtyard between the Bernard and Molitz-Gutelsky Theater level, the theaters, which is also as yet unnamed, incidentally. But first, you're going to see the Bernard. I won't go into too many details, but we've basically transformed that space into a fully flexible 325-seat barn. It is really spectacular. And though the lab gives us a lot of similar opportunities, 150 seats, at 325 seats, we can take far more risks. We can do far more different kinds of things. I can actually immerse you into the action on stage. Somebody heard of that term, immersive theater? A few of you have. This is when you are often in and about the action that is happening on stage. If instead of in this situation where you're off there and the actors will be up here, if I sat you on stage, this would be immersive. So those are the kinds of opportunities that we're going to have in the new Bernard Theater. And that's why my guest, Peter Marks, is here. He's going to talk to me about how theater is changing and moving forward in this country at this moment, and how community gathering and friends in flexible, immersive spaces can play a role in enlivening our theater industry. So please put your hands together for Peter Marks.
So has anything been happening in the world? Yep, there you go.
So has anything been happening in the world of theater in Washington?
No, it's been very quiet here, actually. It's great, very quiet. We're going to talk about some of that, in fact. I can't wait to hear what Peter has to say, but let me first brag on you a little bit with these folks. Peter Marks, everyone who knows Peter Marks, y'all know Peter Marks. Yeah, woo, woo. Peter Marks is the Washington Post's chief theater critic from 2002 to 2023. Prior to that, he was a cultural and political reporter and theater critic for the New York Times, which is when I first started following and reading you, a Yale graduate and 4-time chairperson of the jury for the Pulitzer Prize for drama. He now co-hosts the theater podcast Marks and Vincentelli on Substack, which sounds like a great cop show. Marks and Vincitelli.
I thought a third level law firm.
Or a third level of, yeah, right. Right. Have you been hurt in an auto accident? Call Marks and Vincitelli.
Pardon me.
When asked what else he's doing with his time now, he responds, and he wrote this, anything I want to. He's a member of the Acting Company of Theatre of War, and this summer he will be at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London, where he will be one of 14 students in RADA's Shakespeare acting program. I will add to that, though sure, I do still remember you didn't like my production of On the Town, which I really loved, but that's okay. What really sticks with me, Peter, and all of us in the DMV is the way you've championed a theater community that doubled in size during your tenure. The way you tirelessly went to theaters, large and small, to bring their works to a wider audience. And your writing, your arts journalism is unmatched. And as we were just saying backstage, there are not a lot of folks like you in the world writing the kind of work that you are. And I think what I love about your work always is, no matter what you think of the art that that you've been encountering, my sense is that you always came and took your seat expecting the greatest, expecting to be blown away, expecting to find something new, and you treated that with humility. And if a bad review came, it was more out of disappointment that opportunity was missed. So thank you for being here.
Pleasure. I no longer have to be at my own memorial service when people do these things. It's lovely to hear your kind words, Jason. And yes, I cringe at being reminded of a review where I wasn't celebrating a production. However, I have celebrated the work I've seen at Olney.
Very much, very much.
And I think it's important to note that some of the things I reviewed at Olney were some of the most memorable that I had in my tenure. I don't know how many of you saw the musical AD 16, which for me was a wonderful, wonderful, funny, witty, tuneful piece of theater by Cinco Paul and Becca Brunstetter. Wonderful evening, stands out for me. And those are the kind of evenings that really make it worthwhile being a writer about theater, because you know when you leave the theater, you're going to tell the world about something new and something that is worth hearing about and seeing. And that's the thrill. That's where it becomes pleasure and rewarding, because you know that other people are going to then come and see it. And whether or not they feel exactly the same as you do, they're going to have the experience. And who knows, maybe it'll have more of a life, the show, as a result. So that was a really special world premiere. I have to mention two other shows that I think about when I think about Olney. One was one that was very early in your tenure. It was called Colossal. Again, I'm only mentioning some of the original work. Because that is what a critic really is, a critic cuts their teeth. You know, it's on what's new and what is novel and what is going to push this form forward. And that was a piece about a football player, a very unlikely story, a football player who was injured, a football player who had an interesting romantic life, yes, directed by a wonderful director named Will Davis.
Wow, you remember it well.
Because it's my job. You know, that's what I do. And that was the first time, Jason, that I started to think, you know, this guy is going to propel this company. It wasn't moving in those directions prior to your coming. No knock on what happened before. And I remember the first time I'd heard the name Jason Loewith, it was actually in connection with, and I mentioned this before, The Adding Machine, which was a musical that you co-wrote based on the Elmer Rice play. I'd seen it at studio with Stephen Gregory Smith, a local actor who was wonderful.
I don't even remember directing it, but I guess I did.
Jason, you're getting a little old actor. It's okay. I feel the same way. No, but and the other one I wanted to mention was Carmen, which was a new musical version of the opera, directed by Moises Kaufman with Sergio Trujillo's choreography. It was set in Cuba.
Yep, it was Afro-Cuban jazz. Yep.
And it was another risk. It was a real big risk. It needed some extra work. No, I say that with affection. But it really spoke to the ambition, the aspirations of this theater in central Montgomery County that really, yeah, that's a joke between us. I used to say northern Montgomery County, and I was corrected because it made it sound like it was too far from Washington for people to reach. I lived in Bethesda at the time, so it did feel northern to me. But anyway, so those are some of to me, they were real steps forward. And when you're covering theater and you're sort of the main conduit in journalism for theater in a big metropolis like Washington, it's important to feel bolstered by the work at all the companies that you cover regularly. And Olney did that for me with you, Jason. Even when there was, something I couldn't, sing about, it was still important to be here. And so I thank you for putting up with me in my various moods and states of exaltation.
Listen, artists are a fickle bunch. You may have heard or learned that. And we talk about wanting to be in conversation with the audience and talking about wanting to be in conversation with others about our work. But often we're afraid when they say, no, I didn't like your work, right? And that's not the way to receive it. You need to really appreciate if somebody comes at you with the kind of respect that you do as a writer. You need to take what's there and do your best to learn from it or engage with it, even if you disagree with it in the end. So no worries there.
Yeah, and the other thing about, you have to realize when you're covering a community like Washington, which is actually a very intimate theater community, you're in close quarters with artists, maybe in a way that movie critics never discover, or critics of television never discover, because they're not meeting flesh and blood human beings. They're seeing images on a screen, and so it would even. I remember a time when I got an email and it said it was about a production of Cabaret at Arena Stage, which I didn't like. It had a little, they took, it was ridiculous. It was too literal. They had a train on the stage that took the Jews, away, and I just thought, that was not. It was not a good look for this evening. And I got an email from someone that said, "You are so totally wrong about this production. It's an insult to the cast." And I saw that it was from the father of Brad Oscar, who played the MC. So you never know who you're going to offend or hurt, and that's just part of the business.
Well, thank you, Peter. Now we can both have our funerals, and we don't need So since you've already started talking about it, and you're very kind to talk about some of the great work that you saw at Olney over your tenure, 20 years, where did you see the DMV theater scene taking a real leap forward or different leaps forward? And I'm not talking about, no need to praise Olney.
Sure.
Tell me about an amazing artist, amazing theater, amazing anything.
You told me to praise Olney, so that's
And the money is coming later.
So I was at the New York Times for 10 years, and for some of that time I was a critic there, and they sent me to Washington to review things while I was at the Times, and we did that from time to time, not as much as we did in those days. I mean, the Times doesn't do that, unfortunately, as much. And I had seen some work in Washington and liked it, and when I got a call from the Washington Post asking me if I would be interested in being the chief critic, I was very interested because I had been the second critic at the Times, and Ben Brantley was very healthy. And I knew that I was not going to be the chief critic. So I said yes for a variety of reasons, one of them being that I knew the caliber of the work. And my goal, I would say that it wasn't a spoken goal, but my goal was always to to elevate the reputation of the theater community. And that came by being an outsider who came in, frankly, and had to prove himself, had to prove that he could judge the material here and not sound like a snob and as if he would, he was marching, down from New York. So I found that over time, the work, first of all, interestingly, actors in Washington have highly developed stage muscles. They sometimes, the best actors in Washington are working 4 or 5 times a year on stage. They're real stage animals, and that gives you a tremendous leg up in terms of your interpretive skills. And technique, and I found that very quickly that was the case. What didn't happen quite as quickly was original work. There was still much of the work was coming from 3rd, 4th productions of plays that had been done in New York and Chicago. That still is the case. We still want to see really good stuff that's been done elsewhere. But I felt like that, a community needs to reflect itself.
At that time, in the early 2000s, just quickly, the original work in this country was seems like it was being done in New York, Chicago, and a little bit, am I right, saying Minneapolis, Seattle?
Yeah, but really those 2 cities,
Yeah.
Chicago and New York, really dominated. And the question was always, where does, Washingtonians always wanted to know, where does Washington fit in? There was a lot of pride in the theater here. And the constellation of theaters exhibited a lot of good work that wasn't getting enough attention. And my goal was to make it, not only to make Washington even feel more self-confidence, but also for people outside of this area, principally New York, because I've been there, to take notice of what was being done here. And as a result, things did slowly evolve. You saw more Broadway musicals trying out here first, because Washington audiences are really perceptive. They had a lot of knowledge of the form. And also, I found that the theaters were developing a greater sense of wanting to differentiate themselves from one another and yet still provide the kind of work that would excite audiences. And I think that actually over time, what's very interesting right now, Jason, is that many of the companies, the founders of those companies have moved on, and they've been replaced or they've been succeeded by a very vital group of artistic directors. And I've been saying this, that there's a kind of golden age. And I've heard this actually from people, from theater makers and theater people outside of Washington, that it's the most exciting group of artistic directors in the country right now who are working here. And I take some credit for that.
You should.
Because I think that they appreciated being taken seriously. It's there are probably now 6 theater critics in America who are on a health plan with a newspaper. We're actually full-time.
And when you started, how many do you think there were?
There were probably about 3 times as many. And there were even mid-sized newspapers, some that don't even exist anymore, that had, the first paper I worked at in 1977 was the New Brunswick Home News. And Ernie Albrecht was its theater critic. He went to New York, and this is a paper of 50,000 circulation, and it was just part of the fabric of what a newspaper thought it had to do. And today, it's really not.
So what did we lose when we lost all those newspapers and critics, do you think? Talk to me about that. That was not on the original questions,
Okay.
but you're being interesting. I can't help it.
Yeah, I don't answer if they're not. I can't do that. What we've lost is the cohesion, the conversation that a critic starts and that a critic with a following can develop. It doesn't have to be someone even that you agree with all the time or even half the time, but it's a focal point for the community to evaluate the success or start to evaluate the success of a show. And it's more importantly for readers to be included in the conversation. We have social media, and maybe a lot of people find that as satisfying. I don't know, with the, 240, 280 words telling you this is the best thing I've ever seen or it's the worst thing I've ever seen. That's not what criticism is. That's a blurb. That's a review blurb, and giving context, which was also one of my goals was to give the social context for a play, just to understand where it's coming from and why. And obviously, evaluating performance and what really hits you. I always said that the way I reviewed was, it started with my gut. I'd been going to the theater since I was 5 years old. The first thing I ever saw was Mary Martin in The Sound of Music on Broadway, 1960. Yes, I am 97 years old. It started there. And it started with this feeling that is not intellectual, it's instinctive and emotional. And I always said with plays, my gut spoke to my head. That was the sort of the process. And I have no idea where we got to this in the conversation. I'm trying to think why I'm telling you this, except that we wanted that feeling to be communicated to an audience. You want that excitement to be conveyed in words, and it's not the easiest thing to do, to be able to do that, because a lot of critics think they have to be really smart and show you how smart they are, and I don't think that it helps to be smart, but I think more importantly it helps to be able to convey the power, the emotional sense of what happened in those 2 hours or 90 minutes or the shrinking now to 75 minutes or 48 minutes, whatever it's becoming.
I produced Carol Churchill's Far Away, which was 38 minutes on a good day. My audience thought that was enough, if you know Carol Churchill.
It's also, it's a critic's dream when it says, no intermission.
Oh my God, for sure. So tell me more about some of the amazing work that you have seen here in DC. As you think about, I do think it's true. You have played a major role in putting DC and DMV theater on the map in this country. And as I talked to my ex-colleagues in Chicago, I was there a couple of weeks ago. That is a scene that's in some real disarray. My beloved old theater, Court Theater, which won the Tony Award 2 years ago for Outstanding Regional Theater, has been without an artistic director for 2 years almost. Things are not easy there. But it seems like we've been doing okay here, knock on wood, until the past 3 weeks. But seriously, what have you, as you've brought this attention to the DMV, what has been worthy of that attention? What has made you go, oh, that's a new way forward, that's a new idea about performance?
Sometimes it's happened in the smallest spaces. It hasn't always been in the grandest formats. I would say that, at once upon a time, I found some of that at the Kennedy Center, but that has, even before all this transpired, this ugliness, it had lost some of its creative luster. But I would say, for example, that I saw a show, and some of it was very early on. There was a show in a tiny little space by a company I'd never heard of that was run by these 2 Georgian emigres. And it was this pulsating, feverish, vibrant show about the clash of 2 groups, a Muslim group and a Christian group in the mountains of the Caucasus. And it was called Host and Guest. And I had never seen anything like it. It was dreamlike in its violent passion. And it turned out they became the company Cinetic. And I became devoted to seeing their work, which was like nothing I'd ever seen. It's part choreography, it's part storytelling. And that felt like, yeah, I can work here. I can live here. And another one by a little.
I just want to quickly say, I agree, and I think most everybody here knows that Cinetics, we're presenting Cinetic's Midsummer Night's Dream, one of their first big hits this summer here. But without Cinetic, there would be a giant hole in this ecosystem because what they offer is so unlike anything else.
And because, yeah, applaud, that's right. The other thing about them was they were really organically created in this environment. Arena's father became he left Georgia and became the wrestling coach, I think, at University of Maryland. I mean, that was their way in, and brought Pata here, her husband, who didn't speak a word of English. In the first place he did, he transliterated. Still has problems? Okay. Another, I'll just, there was a company that started like 10 years ago called Pointless Theater. And that's another homegrown group of kids from the University of Maryland. I don't know what's happened to the group.
They're still around. Patty Cleo.
They did a puppet-like version of Swan Lake, I think it was. Am I wrong? Was it Swan Lake? Anyway, and it was done in what's now a closed facility. I think it was on G Street in downtown. There was it was run by an alliance of.
Sure. Yeah, Flashpoint. It was run by the people who own Cultural DC, who own Source Theater and trying to sell it, and that's another story, not for public consumption. Thank you very much.
And there's, it's hard to leave things out. I was thinking of, having seen the first production of Dear Evan Hansen at Arena Stage, which was
Can I actually
fabulous.
ask you, speaking of Arena Stage, and I actually don't remember that probably was not in the Fitch. I don't remember what theater it was in.
Yes, it was. No, it was in the second, the Krieger.
The Krieger, right, yeah. Thinking about theater architecture in here, in the DMV as it relates to formal interest. I mean, the Fitch, if you've never been to Arena Stage and the Fish Handler, which is a giant in the round space, where I remember the Oklahoma Molly's Oklahoma was an amazing production.
Lovely.
I saw Theater J did an amazing Chosen in that space. I'm thinking about Signature's incredibly smart design of a space to bring intimate musicals, to bring intimate experiences of musicals, Studio and their crazy car showrooms. I mean, being able to share the experience in a different relationship between artist and audience makes a big difference in terms of creativity.
Yeah, and in fact, every theater, every major theater that I came to Washington, when I came to Washington and I saw their shows in there, are in completely new environments.
Woolly too.
Woolly, even Studio redesigned and built new spaces over that time. Everybody, and look at what you're doing, which is marvelous.
Mom.
You told me to say marvelous. And
With your New York accent.
Yes, and the interesting thing, one of the interesting things about Washington is that unlike many of the cities, Washington has no warehouse district. It has no found space where you can really transform into theater like, New York, Chicago, all those bedrock theater cities, Boston, Baltimore, they have places that were easy to find, space to create theater. Washington didn't have that. It was a real deficit. It was a dimension. That's why we don't have a theater district. We're scattered. We're dispersed in all parts of the city. You really have to find the theater that you want. You have to really know where they are. And what's happening is, as you're doing in this new space, the Bernard, the whole idea now is that of transformation is that we want to have the audience feel as connected and involved as they possibly can with what's going on stage, and that leads to this whole immersion idea. But I think more importantly, it allows the play to find its own venue, how it wants to be seen.
Sure.
They're doing on Broadway this season. Jonathan Groff is going to be playing Bobby Darin at Circle in the Square, and they're going to make it kind of like a nightclub, where he sings comes up and sings next to your mother, which is certainly, a good idea for mothers.
She wouldn't get a word in edgewise with him.
But it's,
Reading fives.
but we're really in a period where people want that kind of, attention.
So let's go, can we go into that? I'm thinking over the past 10 years for myself, and I'm sure that for you, it's not untrue either. The most impactful shows that I have seen, I'm thinking of Cats the Jellicle Ball at the new Perelman Center, which was set as a drag ball with a giant runway that split the audience. You mentioned Colossal. I'm thinking of the Guys and Dolls we were talking about that some of the folks in this room saw in London, which had hydraulic platforms raising and lowering, and costumed New York cops moving the audience to which part of the giant warehouse they were supposed to go to see the show. There's plenty more that we could talk about. None of those follow the form of the Great American Plays and musicals of these, various 20th century golden ages.
Well, then even last season, the Macbeth with Ray Fine, I said the word, I'm sorry, we're not supposed to say Scottish play, that's true. He did it. I'm so sorry.
A critic, and you want to be an actor?
I'm so sorry I said Macbeth.
Who said we are superstitious
I don't
people?
believe it is the dumbest superstition that exists. It's the dumbest anyway. But so Ray Fiennes, and they did it in a found space, and near
And the jungle as well, also is.
and the jungle at Shakespeare with that did it with Willie. Yes, that's it can get out of hand though. You've got to have an audience that wants to be. I don't believe in the idea of dragging people into the action.
Mm-hmm.
And some actors and performers. I was at a performance at Woolly Mammoth with my pad and pen at a show where it was a one-woman show by a performer named, I'll never forget, named Marga Gomez, and she was not getting the response she wanted from the audience. They weren't grooving. It wasn't her best show, and so she saw me in the audience, and she came up to me. She sat in my lap, and she took my pad and pen and threw it across the room. And and I thought, you're going to get a lousy review. And you sort of want a lousy review because you're going to tell people that the critic didn't like having his pad and pen thrown across the room. But I still gave her a bad review. But I'm just saying, there are times when I do think it gets a little bit cute and out of hand. And I think there still should be a respect for, people's space.
Sure.
And if you don't want to be, be part of what's happening, you should have that. You should have that right. There's even shows, as where they have, splash zones. Right. Where they put, they cover you in plastic, so you don't get, whatever they're squirting at the audience, get squirted at you.
I'm going to challenge you a little bit. How about caveat emptor though? And let the buyer beware. Isn't it the responsibility? It's probably not very popular, and Josh, I'm sorry I'm saying it. Isn't it the responsibility of the purchaser to know what it is they're purchasing? So, if somebody came to, when we did The Hypocrites from Chicago, and they did those great, completely immersive Pirates of Penzance and Mikado, that you could be like in a wading pool with the actors and all of that stuff. I mean, you gotta know what you're coming to, right?
No, I don't think so. And I think that's, here we're getting into spoiler alerts, right? I mean, you're always told, don't reveal what's happening. It's the element of surprise is very important to a lot of theater, a lot of productions. So no, I think you can come expecting to be startled or to be enchanted or even jarred out of your complacency. I don't think that has to happen by, getting you wet or by making you stand up in front of 1,500 people and feel put on display.
It's a very tricky thing. I remember when we did Johnny Dono and Duncan McMillan's Every Brilliant Thing here, and then did it again in studio. I mean, it's really beautiful the way that's a playwright and a comedian playwright who came together to figure out how to bring an audience along in the course of the action to want to play roles and to want to engage, right, with the actor and with each other. So let me ask you, is this a fad? Is this something that I'm thinking, I'm thinking it's the new way forward? Am I crazy? Is it just it's something that always happens every once in a while?
Well, is that, I mean, I could ask you that. Are you like planning these kinds of events? Is this what you see as sort of mainstream part of your mission now?
I think and we'll talk a little bit more about it at the, over when we're in the Bernard, but very much the plan for the Bernard Family Theater was to make it a space where immersive work would have a home, where work that brought the audience into the action. I don't want to reveal some of the ideas I'm going to talk about later, but but so different from this experience right here, although please move Peter from the pie throwing seat. For
No, if there's a contract involved, I'm happy to. But I was going to say, like, so that Guys and Dolls in London, I don't know if anybody's been over to London and seen this Guys and Dolls. It's you have an option. You can be part of the crowd.
True.
And you can move with it, and it's not invasive. It's just, you just have to move. You stand for the whole show, and you're like a citizen on the streets of New York. There are also seats on the perimeter that you can sit in, so you don't have to do that. And I think that's a good way to mitigate.
Do you think that I'm thinking about, first of all, the brain drain or creative drain of brains from that the streaming, the golden age of streaming created, taking playwrights away from New York and anywhere on the East Coast to Los Angeles, where they're all like, I was talking to Becca and Cinco, the authors of AB16 a few weeks ago, and Becca is now the head writer, whatever the phrase is, showrunner of a new series that's about to be happening. Oh, by the way, do you know what they want to call it? We're trying to help them move it forward again to get a commercial production. You know what they want to call it now? And I think I can say this publicly because he put it in an Instagram post.
What?
Sweet Jesus. You can write to Cinco and Becca about what you think about that.
Straight to Branson,
But anyway, so many playwrights went for completely understandable reasons during the streaming wars out to Los Angeles, and they haven't come back. So are we possibly seeing a real decline in the kind of single set living room family drama that was for so long the staple of American theater?
I say no. I think that playwrights are playwrights who, yes, they gravitate towards streaming series. Some of them become very big and don't return, but a lot of them do. They get that out of their system, or they get a pile of money that makes them immune to the vagaries of the business, and they come back. This season on Broadway, for example, there's a family drama, just the kind you're describing, called Cult of Love by Leslie Headland, who actually does write for TV. Yeah. And this is a play about, it takes place on Christmas Eve in a family in Connecticut that is wildly dysfunctional, of course, and but is Mare Winningham is in it, wonderful, Zachary Quinto, really fine actors, and it's the kind of play you would have seen 25 years ago. So then you've got something like Stereophonic, the David Ajmi play, which I hope will be done in Washington at some point. In fact, when I was at the theater one day, I happened to walk by and I saw Ryan Roulette, the artistic director of Roundhouse, walking into the theater to see Stereophonic. So I thought maybe that'll be there. But it's a great, it's a terrific 3.5-hour play about the decline and fall of a great rock group in their recording studio. And it's a one set play. So these works do rise to the top. They do rise up, and I don't feel that. I'm not pessimistic about theater writing in this country anymore.
That's interesting. So what do you what do you see ahead then for theater writing in this country? What are the trends that you think that we're going to be following in the next 10 years, 20 years?
Well, I think that there's a whole generation of playwrights who are looking at the intimacy of the theater as something fresh and unexpected. And I think those younger playwrights are going to continue to find their way onto the stage. You know, in London, they don't even have this debate. You know, London is still a place where lots and lots of plays get done, and there's not this fretting about the death of theater.
Well, I think that's because you have the film and television business of the UK is also in London. So whether you're Jez Butterworth or Matilda Faye, Shayo Imani, or whoever, you can be doing your play, getting your play put on at the Bush to the National.
You'd be editing your TV
editing
show.
your TV show down
Right.
at the BBC4 studios, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
we don't have that. You got to be in Los Angeles, or I don't know how much that's going to change actually now, because there is a lot less work being done in Los Angeles than there
Right,
have been.
exactly.
But certainly you can't have a great playwriting career in Washington and expect that you can also have a great film career, or in New York, I don't think. Maybe I'm wrong.
It's never really been proven. I mean, it's never really, you know, that was the one thing I really had hoped would happen, was that between Georgetown and Maryland and George Washington, you know, these University of Virginia, even in the larger sphere, Howard, I thought that these schools would together create a kind of constellation of playwriting, a consortium almost.
Yeah.
It hasn't really happened.
And it will not happen. It's a real, so I sort of came of artistic age in Chicago, where I was for almost 10 years. And there you had Northwestern, and you had DePaul, and you had the University of Chicago, which the latter did not have a playwriting or acting program, but certainly had a lot of students. And then you also had this draw from every Midwest university of graduates, people coming in. We had graduates from SMU who were creating new companies, graduates from Iowa and Arkansas, and all over the map, because Chicago was the destination, right? So between the universities and this incredibly great youthful energy, people flocking to Chicago, there was a real nascence of great new work. And that was really the 90s. Steppenwolf was part of the start of it. And then that was the 90s and 2000s. That is in Chicago now gone. One would hope that was happening here in DC. A Catholic university just closed all of its MFA programs.
Wow.
All of its MFA programs. Wow. American does not have an MFA program. George Washington doesn't. UMD only has an MFA program in design, which is great because some of the country's greatest designers are being trained in College Park, by the way.
But I will say, that even with these deficits, there are. Look at what some of the theaters are doing. Look at Mosaic, Reggie Douglas, and what he's trying to do with new plays. Look at Haley Finn at Theater J, even commissioning plays by Jews of color. There are places that Woolly Mammoth is still, with Maria Goyanis in charge, they're still putting plays on. They're not birthed in Washington per se. Weren't you the head of the New Play Network? Wasn't that your job?
Yeah, that was the job that brought me to Washington, actually.
So, this is that national network that's supposed to tour new plays from place to place, right?
Close. It did. It was all about, it was an advocacy organization. It is still an advocacy organization for about 150 theaters around the country that produce new plays. And the big thing that they did was this thing called the Continued Life of New Plays Fund, because this is really getting into the weeds real quickly, I will. But you do a world premiere, which is to say the very first production of a play. Nobody wants to do the second production of that play. So this poor playwright who has worked for ages and ages and ages on a play, God forbid, Peter has bad clams when he comes to see it and can't give it a good review.
I beg your pardon?
That play is never sees the light of day. The Continued Life of New Plays Fund created, it had a scheme whereby 3 different theaters would agree to do 3 completely different productions of the same brand new play within a year, get funded for it. INU was part of that, by the way, and you might hear me talking about that another time, but I'm not going to say anything right now. Colossal is part of that.
Yeah, so, which actually makes me think, Jason, when you think about what you want to present to this audience, what tips the in favor of? What's the thing that
It's so funny. A master's student at American, I think, reached out to me about 3 weeks ago, said, can you please take this survey? I'm surveying artistic directors about how they choose their seasons. And she clearly a math and statistics major, had created this whole analytical model, like what % of your decision is based on equity, diversity, inclusion? What percentage of your decisions, and I just wrote back and said, I'm so sorry, I cannot take your survey. That is the question that is asked more frequently of me than anything, and I think my answer has not really changed. There are too many factors to count. The same thing as you say, there is a gut reaction one has when one reads a play or one frankly hears about it from a review sometimes. I can tell, this is something that audiences in the DC area and the Olney area might like. But the thing I will say that's most important, and I think what the Bernard Family Theater gives us is an opportunity. I've always said, we don't have a single audience, we have multiple audiences. And we have been proving that again and again and again, which is why, knock on wood, the theater is financially in okay shape. Donald Trump, don't listen to that. But it's because we pursue these different audiences, and that means for each audience, we need to figure out what's right, I mean, a nice Indian boy is going to be a very different audience profile than my decision to do Waitress, than my decision to do Fella, than my decision to do any number of other plays.
But I think there was a time, and I respect your judgment, there was a time when, the plays were supposed to appeal to everyone. I think that may be one of the bad outcomes of what's happened socially in this country, is that we now have to think about very specific audiences that will respond to this, as opposed to a sense that this is a community-wide experience. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from or what your own personal story is. This one you will respond, and we will feel it together.
We're getting to the really interesting part of the conversation just as we're coming to the end of it. Agree, disagree, all the things. I mean, isn't that, where do I start? I remember in the 1990s and 2000s was when I was really in Chicago, there was a lot of conversation about amongst predominantly white institutions, theaters that cater to predominantly white audience, saying, where is the Black audience in Chicago? Where is the Black audience in Chicago? And there were all these studies being done. People tried to do these studies. Donna Walker-Kuhn, whose amazing book, Invitation to the Party, really helped sort of lay this out. To help say, you know what, you can't say, hey, we're going to do an August Wilson play, and now you're going to want to come back to go see Oklahoma and Carousel and Death of a Salesman and Elmer Rentz's Adding Machine and who knows whatever else, right? This suspicion that art is just a universal, any piece of art is a universal good. You go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art up back in New York, right? The number of people who are in the Egyptian at the Temple of Karnak is very different from the number of people who are at the medieval weaponry hall, except that you have to go through the medieval weaponry hall.
Unless you're mentored, unless someone says, come and look at the medieval armed, and I'm going to tell you a story about these pieces, and suddenly your mind goes, now I get it. I understand. Now I want to tell someone else about what I just heard.
Being interested in cultural difference, of course, it is a luxury that a lot of us have. Oh, I'm trying to.
It's also why criticism is dying, because people aren't that interested in exploring new avenues, and critics are trained to, the whole reason you do that is to be exposed to something you had never thought of before by a person from a group unlike you completely, who touches something, a nerve that reminds you of something in your own life, or something you've read, or something you've heard, or someone you know. That part of the critic's job now has receded, and now we're really just dealing with what is.
Yeah, I remember there was a great story of I went to a TCG conference, actually, my first TCG conference in the I think late 1990s, and this author was already warning. This was the late 90s, already warning about the bubbles that we all find ourselves in, and she was talking about the Norton Museum of Art in Boston, which was the first museum that had put its entire collection online. And what they had created was this opportunity for you to create my museum. And your museum could maybe only have Impressionists. And you would never have to even think that there was medieval armor in the world, or medieval armor, or whatever. And so the idea of the Museum of Me is this terrifying thing. Well, we are now 30 years into that. It's sticking around.
It's why the internet is bad.
With that, I have time for 2 or 3 questions, if that's all right. 2 or 3 questions, if there are, in the 4th row. We'll be talking about that later if you're going to be at the dinner, but go ahead. The Kennedy Center. It's very discouraging.
You need the question repeated.
Yes, but that was the question. The Kennedy Center. It's very disturbing. Was really, talk about that. What happens to us if we don't have art and we don't have books?
What's happening at the Kennedy Center is the death of the Kennedy Center. It is now being politicized overtly. It's, instead of putting the idea of politics in the pieces that people see and because every piece of art is political to some degree, it's now concentrated in the consciousness of someone that half the country does not trust, and it's part of the country that goes to the Kennedy Center that doesn't trust it. And at some point, the decisions will have to be made by each theater goer whether they can stomach the idea that this has been sullied to the point where artists that they respect no longer want to even be associated with the name Kennedy Center. And once that happens, I don't know how it returns to any kind of credibility. It's a tragedy. Whether or not the Kennedy Center was doing the kind of work that you loved or that you even experienced, symbolically, to have a political leader of who's never been there exercise this level of cruelty over staffers, over the choices, over the consciousness of the nation, is so ruinous and so tragic that I don't see it. I feel like it's going to fall out of the conversation entirely as a serious place for the performing arts. It's terrible.
I just want to quickly lift up what something Peter did say. Hundreds and thousands of artists and technicians and artisans who live in the Washington, D.C. area are employed by the Kennedy Center at one time or another. And many of them are now wondering, are they out of work? Should I say I am not going to work? So I think the local impact on our artistic community is not something we're going to know for a while, but it's very, very scary. There's a lot more that is quite scary too.
And I don't know, maybe it'll evolve. Maybe we'll come to another understanding of what it means to still perform there, despite his what he's doing to it. You know, this summer there's supposed to be a production of Parade at the Kennedy Center, which is a musical about Leo Frank, a Jew who was lynched in Atlanta in the early 20th century. And it's, I believe its composer is working on a piece about Nazism and its effect on Germany. And I wonder what he's thinking about having that piece, or maybe, I'm sorry, actually, I'm confusing. It's actually Jonathan Spector, who's the playwright of Eureka Day, which is coming to the Kennedy Center soon. He's the one working on the piece, forgive me. And I wonder under what circumstances he thinks, you know, his research is being validated in a sense by what's happening there and how he feels about his play being done at the Kennedy Center.
Susan says she would not be surprised if the Kennedy Center cancels that. Yeah, and it should be, for those of you that don't know, the Kennedy Center just this past week canceled. Their Theater for Young Audiences program is one of the very, very best in the nation, bar none, maybe Children's Theater of Minneapolis. They just canceled a hit production from in December called Finn, a story about a shark who wants to swim a little differently. They had a tour planned all across the country and they just pulled it. So that's going to keep happening. I think we have time for maybe one more question. I'm sorry that we don't have more time.
Jason,
Yes.
is it possible that this fiasco might act as a catalyst to bring the other DC theaters together to be more active and as a countermeasure?
The question was, is it possible this fiasco will enable the theaters around the region to come together to respond?
Well, I think that's incumbent on the theaters of DC to do that. And it should start with a group of the theaters staging Finn, the musical. That would be a good first step.
Pardon me, on Monday, I had the honor to present the Victor Shorguy Leadership Award to Greg Henry, who pretty much is the driving force at the Kennedy Center behind all their artist training programs, including most particularly the Kennedy Center American College Theater Festival. And I can tell you that in my remarks, I said exactly the same thing, that we need to unite together with one voice. We need to not turn against each other in fear of scarcity. And we need to remember what the Kennedy Center is all about. That was a president. I'm not going to try to quote him off the top of my head, but please, if you haven't, read his amazing speech about the arts from October 1963 at Amherst College. You will never hear a president speak more eloquently about the importance of the artist to challenge the status quo in a civil society to make it prosper. So, yeah.
And not that this is the most important outcome, but watch that the Kennedy Center Honors will now honor Kid Rock, John Voight, Roseanne Barr, and the Village People. That'll be I mean, I think that we're
I might finally be able to get a ticket. Thank you all so much. Please join me in thanking Peter Marks for joining us in staging the future dinner. Please take a walk over to the Bernard Family Theater for the first time. Thanks.
We really